It is difficult to forget the image of the towering, sharp-eyed cowboy, Lucas McCain, the fearless father equipped with a custom Winchester rifle in The Rifleman, one of the most cherished Western series in the annals of American television history. Yet behind that iconic portrayal was Chuck Connors, a man whose real-life journey was equally captivating and, at times, more sorrowful than any scripted drama. From his rise as a rare dual-sport athlete during America's most trying era to his emergence as a symbol of resilience on the small screen, Connors carried both extraordinary achievements and profound personal pain. It is widely acknowledged that Chuck Connors harbored numerous secrets throughout his challenging life, and today we aim to unveil them. But what profound secret did he carry to his final moments? A secret so deeply personal, it remained concealed until after his passing. If Chuck Connors left an indelible mark on your childhood memories, please consider leaving a like as a silent tribute to this legendary figure. Long before the world recognized a cowboy with a rifle and a righteous gaze, before the name Lucas McCain resonated in living rooms across America, there was simply Kevin Joseph Aloysius Connors, a tall, contemplative youth navigating the wearisome streets of Brooklyn during one of the most unforgiving periods in American history. Born on April 10, 1921, to Irish immigrant parents, Alan and Marcella Connors, Chuck entered a world that demanded immense effort and offered scant reward. The Great Depression was not merely a historical period. It was a daily, pervasive reality that plunged millions into silence, hunger, and despair. His father toiled as a longshoreman on the docks, enduring harsh cold and brutal working hours, while his mother took on small, intermittent jobs to make every dollar stretch as far as possible. Their home was modest, their meals simple, and their aspirations had to possess a strength that defied their circumstances. In a 1985 interview, Chuck quietly reflected, "We didn't have much, but we had each other, and somehow that was enough." That recollection was not sentimental. It offered a glimpse into a household where the heating system frequently failed, where shoes were worn threadbare, and where hope manifested as a single shared smile during dinner. As a child, Chuck found solace not in comfort, but in physical activity. The worn sidewalks of Bay Ridge transformed into his personal playing fields, and the dusty courts of the local boys' club served as his sanctuary. He played baseball with an intensity that mirrored the struggle for survival of others, not for accolades, but simply to feel alive. His gaze perpetually sought a path to escape, a way to move forward. And at merely 14 years of age, a glimmer of opportunity emerged. His innate athleticism, raw and unrefined, yet undeniable, attracted the attention of talent scouts. He was awarded a scholarship to Adelphi Academy, a private institution that stood in stark contrast to his familiar surroundings. "I never felt like I belonged," he later confessed, "but I knew I had to make it count." It was a painful paradox, being the impoverished one amidst privilege, burdened by expectations and the gnawing fear of inadequacy. However, Chuck bore this burden with a quiet sense of pride. At Adelphi, he excelled in multiple sports, not just one: baseball, basketball, football, track. He was relentless. Every swing of the bat, every drop of sweat represented a step further removed from poverty. Yet even as he ascended, the shadows of his origins never fully receded. "Sometimes I'd sit alone after practice," he revealed in a rare 1981 reflection, "just thinking how lucky I was and how scared I was to lose it." That fear, that inner drive, remained with him, burning behind his calm demeanor and steady posture. It provided him with the edge that would later define Lucas McCain, a man acquainted with suffering, yet reticent to speak of it. In retrospect, the true tragedy wasn't merely the hardship of his life, it was the quiet internal toll it took. Chuck never embellished his humble beginnings, but anyone who listened attentively could discern the undertones. The heartache of a childhood marked by longing, the profound silence of dreams that outgrew the confines of a working-class apartment. Nevertheless, he somehow transformed all that adversity into motivation. The boy from Brooklyn didn't just endure, he prepared. Every sprint, every silent prayer, every late night spent with an empty stomach forged the foundation of a man who would one day stand as a towering figure in the American consciousness. He did not emerge from privilege. He was a product of sheer persistence, and that distinction made all the difference. When one grows up with so little, even a small kindness can feel like a miraculous gift. For Chuck, that gift was movement: running, catching, jumping, throwing. Sports were not merely a pastime, they were his liberation, his voice in a world that rarely acknowledged him. By the time he enrolled at Seton Hall University in the early 1940s, Chuck was no longer just surviving, he was flourishing. Tall, agile, and driven, he competed in both basketball and baseball, earning the respect of teammates and scouts alike. His distinctive moniker, Chuck, originated from his customary shout to teammates, "Chuck it to me," a phrase delivered with the very same hungry energy that would define him in later years. However, beneath the smiles and statistics lay a young man still fleeing poverty, fear, and the ever-present possibility of losing it all in an instant. And in many respects, that moment did arrive. In 1946, Chuck joined the Boston Celtics during their inaugural season. Standing at 6 feet 5 inches, he was one of the tallest individuals on the court and made history as the first NBA player to shatter a backboard during a game. His physical presence was undeniable, but widespread fame did not immediately follow. He participated in only 49 games, averaging 4.5 points per outing. It was not a failure, but it was not the future he had envisioned. Less than a year later, he departed from the Celtics, not by choice, but because he believed baseball offered a more promising trajectory. That conviction would soon lead to heartbreak. On May 1st, 1949, Chuck Connors finally achieved his major league debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers. For a boy from Bay Ridge, donning that uniform represented the ultimate realization of a lifelong dream. Yet, fate can be capricious. He played in just one game, hit into a double play, and was reassigned to the minor leagues before he had a chance to truly savor the moment. That day lingered with me for years, he confessed decades later. I thought that was it, that I had ruined everything. But Chuck possessed an unwavering spirit. He continued to play in the minor leagues with relentless determination, moving from the Montreal Royals to the Los Angeles Angels, wherever his career took him. In 1951, he received another opportunity, this time with the Chicago Cubs. He played 66 games, hit 2 home runs, and maintained a batting average of .239. While not enough to elevate him to stardom, it was an accomplishment far exceeding that of most others. He wasn't merely playing for statistics, he was playing for self-worth. Every swing of the bat represented a battle against the internal voice that whispered he wasn't good enough. In the quiet solitude of clubhouses and roadside motels, Chuck began to sense a shift. Perhaps the dream he had pursued his entire life was not destined to last, he mused. Perhaps the field was not where his true impact would be made. I loved the game, he shared in a 1981 interview, but I started to realize maybe the game didn't love me back. That realization dawned not with bitterness, but with clarity and the fortitude to adapt. And it was within that unexpected interlude, between shattered aspirations and unbridled hope, that Hollywood discovered him. While playing for the minor league Los Angeles Angels in 1952, Chuck connected with a towering home run that captured the attention of a casting director in the stands. He wasn't actively seeking an actor, but he recognized something profound in Chuck's athletic stance, his commanding presence, and his expressive face. Days later, Chuck Connors, former NBA player, aspiring MLB star, and Brooklyn native, found himself within the hallowed halls of MGM Studios, being offered a screen test. It wasn't the dream he had initially sought, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was the one he was destined to fulfill. Sometimes life's most significant turning points emerge from what initially seems like a setback. In 1952, Chuck Connors was still diligently pursuing the remnants of his baseball aspirations, playing for the minor league Los Angeles Angels. The cheers were less enthusiastic, the stadium lights dimmer, and his body bore the quiet fatigue of a man who had poured his all into a dream that ultimately offered little reciprocation. Yet, destiny possesses a peculiar habit of revealing itself in unexpected circumstances. That year, during a routine game, Chuck launched a prodigious home run. It wasn't solely the distance that impressed. It was the grace of his movement, the quiet authority he exuded on the field, and his raw, unyielding intensity. Among the spectators was Billy Gordon, a casting director from MGM. Gordon wasn't at the game to scout for actors, but upon observing Chuck, tall, rugged, and naturally expressive, he remarked to a colleague, "That's the Laurence Olivier of the diamond." That singular moment, a confluence of chance and understated charisma, irrevocably altered his course. Following the game, Gordon approached Chuck directly in the locker room, presenting him with a business card. "Have you ever considered acting?" he inquired. Chuck responded with a laugh. He hadn't. His focus remained squarely on the next pitch, the next game. However, mere days later, a minor injury temporarily sidelined him. It wasn't severe, but it provided just enough respite to contemplate a new direction. Driven by curiosity, Chuck ventured to MGM for a screen test. What transpired next was nothing short of extraordinary. As the camera began to roll, something clicked into place. He was no longer engaged in baseball, but the same intense focus, the same unspoken passion he had cultivated for years on the field, translated seamlessly to the cinematic medium. Within 3 days, Chuck Connors had signed his inaugural Hollywood contract. For a man who had spent the preceding decade being told he wasn't good enough, this affirmation was profoundly impactful. "It felt like I had finally been seen," he later articulated in a 1964 interview. His inaugural role materialized in Pat and Mike, a romantic comedy starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. Chuck portrayed a minor character, always a police captain, but it represented more than just a debut. It was an opening. On set, Spencer Tracy took him aside and offered words of encouragement. "Stick with it. You've got something." That simple sentence ignited a passion within Chuck that no roaring stadium crowd ever had. He immersed himself in acting with the same fervent dedication he had once reserved for sports. Over the subsequent 5 years, he accepted every role that came his way, regardless of its prominence, whether on the periphery or with dialogue. His physical stature was imposing, but his performances began to reveal a burgeoning depth. He portrayed characters who were quiet, vulnerable, and noble. In 1957, he secured a position that would subtly realign his course once more. Within Disney's production of Old Yeller, Chuck embodied the firm yet affectionate father, Burns Sanderson. Though the film was a family narrative, Connors infused the character with genuine warmth. Executives overseeing a new television venture observed closely. They were in the process of developing a Western set in the Old West, focusing on a widower raising his son. Upon witnessing Chuck's performance in Old Yeller, they knew they had discovered their ideal actor. And so, without any significant announcement, the young man from Brooklyn, whose athletic career had been largely overlooked, found his path towards something far more lasting. He no longer needed to achieve athletic victories. He was on the verge of etching his name into the annals of American television history. Reflecting years later, Chuck remarked, "Baseball equipped me to handle defeat. Acting taught me resilience." And within that straightforward statement lay the core of his experience. Hollywood didn't merely offer him a second opportunity, it bestowed upon him a voice, a sense of purpose, and a haven where every unspoken sorrow from his past could finally find expression, even if it was through the portrayal of a gunslinger burdened by loss. In 1958, after years marked by sports-related injuries and Hollywood's subtle appraisals, Chuck Connors finally stood beneath the intense Arizona sun on the set of The Rifleman, ready to breathe life into Lucas McCain. At that precise moment, he transcended the role of an actor. He was transforming into the iconic paternal figure that millions of American homes would embrace as their own, strong, composed, and profoundly human. Initially, when producers extended the offer for the role, Chuck was hesitant to accept. The proposed compensation was less than his previous engagements, but MGM enhanced the proposal by granting him a 5% share of the program's earnings, a calculated gamble on his inherent authenticity. He agreed, recognizing this might represent his final chance at a meaningful endeavor. What ensued was a lifetime's dedication. He dedicated extensive hours to training under Rod Redwing, perfecting his horsemanship in the intricate technique of manipulating his specially modified Winchester rifle. His hands developed calluses and his muscles ached. Yet each drop of perspiration and every pang of discomfort served as an investment in genuine portrayal. It was the embodiment of a man who had endured significant life losses but was determined not to surrender his sense of self. In a rare 1965 interview, Chuck shared his perspective, stating that portraying Lucas McCain was a blessing that came with its share of hardships, a sentiment evident in his voice, a blend of pride tinged with the acknowledgement of sacrifice. The series debuted on September 30th, 1958, reaching homes across the nation. It was more than a weekly Western. It was an intimate glimpse into a father's emotional landscape, a depiction of affection framed by resilience. Lucas McCain, a rancher raising his son Mark alone in the challenging New Mexico territory after his wife's passing, emerged as a symbol of fatherly devotion and moral uprightness. Correspondence flooded in. Letters arrived from single fathers who credited the character with providing them the fortitude to parent their children, from Vietnam veterans seeking stability and justice upon their return home, and from teenagers grappling with families fractured by economic hardship or bereavement. A gentleman from Idaho penned, "Observing Lucas has given me an anchor in times of uncertainty. Thank you, Mr. Connors, for illuminating the true nature of love." On its premiere night, over 14 million households were captivated by the show. It rapidly ascended to become the fourth most watched program during its inaugural season. However, for Chuck, this success came with a silent consequence. He ceased to be perceived as himself, becoming indistinguishable from Lucas. The distinctive hat, the steady hand holding the rifle, the unwavering moral compass. The public could no longer differentiate the man from the legend. He recounted in a personal letter to a close confidant in 1961, "For a considerable period, I haven't seen Chuck when I've looked in the mirror. I see Lucas, and at times I question who remains within." Behind the scenes, Chuck was more than just an actor. He was an integral creative contributor, serving as a story consultant, refining dialogue to ensure Lucas sounded like an authentic working rancher, and inviting former colleagues, such as Duke Sander, to appear as guest stars to enhance the program's credibility. He also provided guidance to emerging actors like Dennis Hopper, encouraging them to discover the individual beneath the character's persona. Nevertheless, his dedication, while lauded on screen, inadvertently restricted him in his professional life. Directors and casting agents began to exclusively envision him as Lucas McCain. Any trace of a New York accent or a tough, streetwise demeanor outside that context threatened to shatter the established illusion. He found himself repeatedly declining scripts outside the Western genre, not by preference, but due to being typecast. By his final season in 1963, after 168 episodes and numerous emotionally charged confrontations between Lucas and his son, Chuck found himself ensnared by his own creation. He was a hero on film, yet his career path had been obstructed by a barrier too imposing to surmount. Nevertheless, he bore the weight of the role with dignity. During the filming of one particular episode, he dedicated an entire afternoon to rehearsing a single scene, focused on teaching young Mark the importance of confronting fear rather than evading it. Crew members recalled the moistness in his eyes when the director called for cut, observing that in that instant, Chuck wasn't merely acting. He was embodying that fatherly presence. To this day, viewers remember that particular scene as one of the most impactful portrayals of fatherhood ever showcased on television. The Rifleman not only set household viewing standards, but also reshaped broadcast television's cultural landscape. It introduced a form of masculinity that embraced tenderness, acknowledged sorrow and vulnerability, and wielded a firearm not to intimidate, but to protect what was just. Chuck Connors carried the responsibility of this message daily. He felt proud, yet also weary. His physical bearing, his controlled posture, and his calm demeanor became both Lucas's protective shield and at times his confinement. In a personal letter penned in 1964, he expressed, "I have channeled my strength into Lucas, and occasionally I feel depleted when I return home." Our lives have become irrevocably intertwined. By the final season, his public adoration remained unwavering. But the distinction between Chuck and Lucas had blurred to such an extent that Hollywood ceased to recognize the man behind the celebrated persona. In the eyes of the audience, Chuck Connors was Lucas McCain, and nothing else seemed to matter. Yet, within this very paradox lies the essence of his most significant performance. He didn't merely provide America with a television hero, he offered them a father figure, one who carried quiet anguish, steadfast affection, and an unyielding moral compass, all captured within the elegant spin of a rifle and the backdrop of a prairie sunset. As the credits rolled for the concluding episode in 1963, there was no grand ceremony, only the lingering echo of a rifle shot and the profound silence of millions missing something they hadn't fully grasped. A real father who had struggled too intensely to preserve his identity within a fabricated persona. It wasn't solely the on-screen connection between Lucas McCain and his son Mark that captivated America. Behind the scenes of The Rifleman, a far more profound and touching relationship was developing between Chuck Connors and the young actor Johnny Crawford. What began as a casting choice evolved into a lifelong bond that would withstand decades, numerous challenges, and ultimately poignant farewells. He was more than a co-star. He was a genuine father to me, Johnny would later share, his voice thick with emotion at Chuck's funeral in 1992. That singular statement, unscripted and heartfelt, conveyed more than any thousand lines of dialogue could. From the very inception of filming in 1958, Chuck took Johnny under his tutelage. Off the set, he served not only as a mentor in acting, but in life itself. Chuck would invite Johnny on weekend excursions, where they would share stories around a campfire and discuss matters extending far beyond the realm of Hollywood. Johnny recalled, "He instructed me in fishing, in properly saddling a horse, but most importantly, he imparted lessons on the essence of manhood." Their shared experiences were not intended for public display, which perhaps made them all the more meaningful. On set, Chuck ensured Johnny never felt like a junior member. Once filming concluded, he would take Johnny to baseball games, even introducing him to his former athletic peers. Chuck, who had seen his own athletic aspirations fade, found a form of fulfillment in nurturing a young individual who looked up to him with paternal admiration. As The Rifleman progressed, so did the emotional depth of their scenes together. The tender gazes, the protective embraces, the gentle guidance. These were not merely well-executed performances, but reflections of a genuine connection that had blossomed away from the cameras. Many members of the production crew noted a discernible softening in Chuck's demeanor when interacting with Johnny. "It was akin to observing a biological father and son," remarked one cameraman. Indeed, in many respects it was. However, the depth of their bond was most profoundly illustrated decades later, long after the cameras had ceased to roll. At Chuck Connors' funeral in November 1992, Johnny Crawford stood before the assembled mourners, struggling to compose himself. Chuck, he explained, was more than just Lucas McCain. He was the individual who provided him with a sense of security during times of apprehension. He was present during the loss of his first pet. He offered more enthusiastic applause than anyone else when Johnny received his high school diploma. "I haven't merely lost a friend," Johnny stated. "I've lost a father." This was not a staged public relations effort or a dramatic Hollywood portrayal. It was an expression of pure, sorrowful, and irreplaceable affection. In an industry where relationships often prove fleeting, theirs endured. It was founded not on fame or contractual obligations, but on shared meals, quiet counsel, and unspoken understanding. Chuck Connors may have portrayed America's beloved father figure on screen, but to Johnny Crawford, he embodied that role every single day. This particular aspect of Chuck's life narrative, so understated yet profoundly significant, adds a layer to his legacy that no award nomination or a fan letter could ever achieve. Amidst a career characterized by dramatic peaks and painful valleys, the relationship he cultivated with Johnny stands as one of the most authentic and enduring accomplishments of his life. And perhaps for those who continue to revisit The Rifleman in the late hours, it is this invisible connection between fiction and reality that ensures the story's lasting appeal and evokes a touch of melancholy in our hearts. Yet, As the accolades for the rifleman subsided and the cameras fell silent, a new challenge emerged, one that was not scripted but intensely real. For Chuck Connors, Jerome Boschasakochiners, the very success that had propelled him into American households night after night inadvertently became the confines of his professional existence. By the conclusion of the show's run, encompassing 168 episodes, Chuck was no longer perceived as an actor, but as Lucas McCain. And ironically, therein lay the core issue: typecasting. It's a term that sounds clinical, but within the context of Hollywood, it could feel akin to a perpetual sentence. Chuck found himself inundated with proposals to portray more cowboys, more rugged men, more iterations of the very same individual he had already masterfully embodied. He declined 8 pilot episodes for Western television series within a mere 2 years following the conclusion of The Rifleman. "I had no desire to spend the remainder of my life astride a horse," he once remarked. Yet, extricating himself from that mold proved considerably challenging. He made genuine attempts. In Branded, airing from 1965 to 1966, he took on the role of a disgraced cavalry officer striving to reclaim his honor. The character was multifaceted, brooding, and starkly different from Lucas McCain's unwavering integrity. Subsequently, in Roots, which aired in 1977, Chuck assumed what was arguably his most jarring portrayal yet: a cruel slave owner. His performance was chilling, unsparing, and merited him an Emmy nomination. However, for a considerable portion of the audience, it proved too difficult to disentangle the beloved figure they knew from the man he was now portraying. The enduring legacy of McCain cast a formidable shadow. Even in science fiction, such as Soylent Green alongside Charlton Heston, Chuck could not entirely escape the public's perception. Casting directors would subtly remark, "He's too Western, too much like McCain." Within the depths of his quiet, steely blue eyes, the man himself began to harbor doubts. In an interview conducted in 1979, he confessed, "At times I questioned whether Lucas was a blessing or a curse. He bestowed upon me everything, yet he also deprived me of so much." It presents a stark paradox to be so profoundly cherished for a single role that it eclipses every other facet of your artistic expression. For Chuck Connors, the weight of being recognized as America's quintessential father figure was not merely an honor. It was a profound obligation. It was a burden he bore with pride, yet perhaps also with a silent melancholy that never fully abated. Behind the facade of Hollywood glamour and the strong, morally upright persona of Lucas McCain, Chuck Connors was a man carrying the immense weight of a private existence far more tumultuous than the character who propelled him to stardom. He was not solely a television hero. He was also a man who navigated the emotional aftermath of 3 failed marriages, each one further eroding the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. While he embodied America's ideal father on screen, Connors' personal relationships were frequently tempestuous, fraught with tension, and marred by heartache and controversy. And perhaps the most painful aspect is not merely the stark contrast, but the considerable time it took for the world to perceive the truth. His initial union with Elizabeth Riddell, established in 1948, commenced during his tenure as a minor league baseball player in Canada. Together, they were blessed with 4 sons, and for a period, they represented the quintessential post-war American family. Photographs from those years depict them with joyful smiles at picnics, visiting baseball stadiums, and posing for festive Christmas cards. However, behind closed doors, Chuck's persistent infidelity had already begun to undermine that seemingly perfect domestic scene. Insiders within Hollywood whispered about his flirtations with his female co-stars, his late-night excursions, and the clandestine phone conversations that Elizabeth chose to ignore. "I was married to the character he portrayed, not the man he was becoming," she reportedly confided to a friend in the early 1960s. By 1962, their marriage had crumbled under the strain of emotional betrayal. Merely 1 year later, Chuck remarried, this time to Carmela Davy, an Indian actress he encountered on the set of Geronimo. This union caused a considerable stir in Hollywood. An interracial marriage during a period of intense racial discord in America was significant news, and Chuck initially welcomed the attention. Yet what the tabloids failed to capture were the hushed arguments, the emotional detachment, and the persistent rumors of physical altercations. Colleagues described their dynamic as volatile, oscillating between romantic devotion and periods of profound coldness or cruelty. Carmela's friends later disclosed that she often felt more like a prop within Chuck's public narrative than an equal partner in his life. Following their divorce in 1972, Chuck embraced a period of bachelorhood until, in 1977, he married Faith Quabius, a former Playboy bunny who was more than 3 decades his junior. This pairing raised eyebrows, even within Hollywood's relatively liberal industry. They married swiftly and lived extravagantly. However, those close to Chuck began to observe concerning behaviors: his disregard for established boundaries, his sudden outbursts of temper, and an unsettling realization that the fame he once controlled now exerted control over him. The marriage dissolved within 3 years amidst swirling rumors of psychological manipulation, unpredictable mood swings, and veiled threats. Chuck, once the emblem of calm strength on The Rifleman, appeared increasingly tormented off-screen. These failed marriages painted a sobering portrait. While Lucas McCain epitomized loyalty, honor, and emotional stability, Chuck Connors was frequently impulsive, distant, and caught in self-destructive cycles. One of his sons later commented in an interview, "People perceived him as this extraordinary father figure, but we knew him as someone who pursued acting roles more diligently than he attended our birthdays, who offered kisses to fans more readily than hugs to us." The damage inflicted was profound. Chuck's relationships with his children became strained. He missed graduations, birthdays, and even hospital visits. One son reportedly ceased all communication with him for several years. The warmth he displayed on set, the reassuring hand placed on Johnny Crawford's shoulder, the paternal smile, these were rarely evident in private. Instead, his family witnessed a man consumed by his own legend, trapped by external expectations, and either unable or unwilling to reveal his vulnerabilities. His friends also noted this striking dichotomy. On set, Chuck could illuminate a room, but in solitude he seemed shadowed, preoccupied, and guarded. He was two distinct individuals, one director recalled: the man who moved America to tears every Thursday night, and the man who wept alone in his trailer once the cameras ceased rolling. Some of his female co-stars grew fatigued with his conduct. Several opted not to collaborate with him again, citing behaviors that ranged from inappropriate flirtatiousness to outright emotional manipulation. While no such issues were made public during his lifetime, the prevailing private sentiment was clear. Chuck Connors was complex, charismatic, but emotionally hazardous. Yet still few felt compelled to speak out. His undeniable charisma, his widespread fame, and the towering presence of Lucas McCain provided a significant shield. It wasn't until after his passing in 1992, as the initial wave of tributes subsided and old acquaintances began to speak more openly, that a more complete picture began to emerge. The icon whom America adored had, in reality, lived a life riddled with profound contradictions. His most celebrated role had evolved into his most oppressive burden, and his loved ones, those who existed beyond the glare of the cameras, were often left lingering in the shadows. Chuck Connors' narrative compels us to delve deeper into the intricate interplay of fame, familial bonds, and personal identity. It poses the challenging question: can a single individual simultaneously embody both heroism and heartbreak, both iconic status and absence? And if so, which of these facets do we ultimately choose to remember? The man on the screen or the man behind it? Ultimately, perhaps the most poignant tragedy was not the disintegration of his marriages or the fracturing of his family. It was the very qualities that made him unforgettable to millions: his strength, his stoicism, and his charisma, that concurrently constructed the emotional barriers that kept those closest to him at a distance. Chuck Connors was far more than just a character on television. He was a man wrestling with internal conflict, profound sorrow, and intricate complexities. And much like many extraordinary performances, his true story remained largely uncomprehended until long after the final curtain descended. Chuck Connors might have captivated audiences with his rugged charm and paternal wisdom on the screen, but behind the scenes, a distinctly different narrative was unfolding, one that was far more controversial, complex, and achingly human. As Lucas McCain, he projected the archetype of a man every son admired and every daughter trusted. However, many of those who collaborated with him, particularly women, would later recount a less polished and more unsettling reality. Within the closely knit circles of Hollywood during the 1960s and 70s, hushed conversations regarding Chuck's conduct became increasingly prevalent. Several of his female co-stars reportedly declined future projects with him, citing his excessively flirtatious demeanor, conversations that transgressed personal boundaries, and persistent advances. On the surface, these interactions might have been dismissed as mere harmless charm, but behind closed doors, a palpable sense of unease permeated the atmosphere. As one unnamed actress allegedly confided, he played a gentleman on screen, but he didn't always understand where the performance concluded. Others on set echoed similar sentiments of discomfort. Crew members recalled instances where Chuck's demeanor would shift abruptly from jovial and magnetic to cold or controlling, contingent upon the level of attention he received. His imposing physical presence, once a comforting symbol of paternal strength, could transform into an instrument of intimidation when events did not unfold according to his wishes. While no formal accusations were ever officially recorded during his lifetime, the sheer volume of quiet refusals to work with him and again spoke volumes. Concurrently in his personal life, the fissures were becoming even more pronounced. Some of his children, particularly those from his first marriage to Elizabeth Riddell, have over the years expressed a profound sense of emotional neglect. In a rare interview, one son stated, "People ask me what it was like to have Lucas McCain as a father. I tell them I didn't. I watched him on television, just like everyone else. But in reality, he was never present. The incongruity was deeply painful. Millions perceived Connors as the ultimate protector, the man who would spare no effort to safeguard his son Mark in The Rifleman. Yet his own sons, his flesh and blood, often had to navigate their most formative years without him. Birthdays passed without a phone call. Significant life events occurred and concluded with no acknowledgement. Even when physically present, Chuck was described as distracted, preoccupied with scripts, his fame, or his next romantic pursuit. This emotional distance extended into his relationships with friends and colleagues. While some found him generous and captivating, others characterized him as moody and dismissive. A recurrent theme in these accounts was his unpredictability. Moments of warmth were often followed by sudden withdrawal. Praise could be exceeded by harsh criticism. A fellow performer once observed, "Chuck possessed an uncanny ability to make you feel like the sole focus of his attention, only for you to then realize he wasn't truly absorbing anything." As the years progressed and his prominence waned, these tendencies became more evident. His interactions with younger women attracted growing disapproval, and anecdotes of his impulsive outbursts became more prevalent. Many came to see him as a man perpetually residing within the protective shell of Lucas McCain, unwilling to reveal his true self, even as that fabricated persona grew increasingly unmanageable. Looking back, Chuck Connors' existence away from the cameras was a study in contrasts. He was lauded for his ethical integrity on screen, yet often strayed far from those very principles in his personal life. His journey prompts us to consider the cost of elevating public figures without scrutinizing the private compromises that enable their elevated status. What becomes of the heroic figure we admire when they exist solely within the confines of broadcast schedules? And what toll does this illusion exact on those closest to them? The poignant reality of Chuck Connors' life wasn't solely defined by his faltering relationships or the hushed gossip that followed him through studio corridors. It resided in the vast gulf between the man the world adored and the individual who, by many accounts, never fully engaged with those who depended on him most. He was a luminescence that brightened countless homes, yet cast significant shadows within his own. Perhaps the true sorrow of his legacy isn't his failure to achieve perfection, but rather the painful lesson he imparted about how often the most radiant myths obscure the deepest darkness. In the concluding phase of Chuck Connor's existence, the distinctions between his characters and himself once again blurred, this time revealing raw emotion and palpable vulnerability. In 1991, almost 30 years after The Rifleman concluded, Connors reprised his most celebrated role in the television film The Gambler Returns, The Luck of the Draw. As he once more donned the boots of Lucas McCain, eyewitnesses recounted how he was moved to tears while selecting the appropriate hat for the character. That solitary moment conveyed a profound depth of feeling. This was more than just a part. It was an intrinsic element of his being, a persona he clung to and cherished. Lucas McCain had become his enduring legacy, his persistent shadow, and perhaps his ultimate solace. However, underpinning this reunion was a deeply sad truth. Years of smoking had taken their inevitable toll on Connors. In early 1992, he received a diagnosis of lung cancer. Shortly thereafter, he was hospitalized with pneumonia. Merely months after stepping back into McCain's world, Chuck Connors passed away on November 10, 1992, at the age of 71. The illness that claimed his breath also silenced one of television's most enduring voices. At his memorial service, Johnny Crawford, who portrayed his on-screen son and was a close companion in real life, delivered a heartfelt eulogy with evident emotion. "He was more than a fellow actor," Johnny stated softly. "He was a remarkable individual. He was my friend. He was my father." These words resonated with the feelings of countless viewers who had grown up watching The Rifleman, who had looked to Lucas McCain as a symbol of resilience and moral clarity in a world undergoing rapid change. Chuck Connors was not an unblemished figure, but his impact was undeniably significant. In 1984, he was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a formal acknowledgement of his contributions to the entertainment industry. Yet, his most profound legacy resides in the hearts of people, not on inscribed markers. For numerous generations, he personified the ideal paternal figure, the frontier embodiment of morality, the man who stood firm against injustice. The enduring image of Lucas McCain walking alongside his son Mark across the arid landscapes of New Mexico transcended mere television programming. It evolved into cherished memory, compelling myth, and profound meaning. Even today, The Rifleman remains a cherished classic, particularly among older American audiences who recall the communal experience of gathering as a family week after week to witness narratives of bravery, discipline, and affection. Chuck Connors offered them more than a character. He provided them with aspiration, stability, and an archetypal image of fatherhood that many yearn for and some never experienced. So, what insights can we glean from his life story? Perhaps it is this: legends are not forged in the absence of flaws, but in the fortitude to navigate the inherent contradictions of existence. Chuck Connors lived a life replete with both acclaim and remorse, with profound connections and significant estrangement, with notable achievements and considerable hardship. He was an athlete, a cinematic icon, a father, a solitary soul, but above all, he was profoundly human. If Chuck Connors left any impression on your recollections, whether viewed on a black and white television in your family's living room or through a quiet moment shared with your own father, please share your experiences in the comments below. If this tribute resonated with you in some way, please consider showing your appreciation by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Let us collectively preserve these memories. Cherish them not only for the man he was, but for the enduring legend he will forever remain.